All right, welcome back inside our proactive newsroom. And joining me now is David Laval. He is the global head of ETF for Grayscale. And David, it's great to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I want to ask you a bit about the Future Finance ETF in just a second. We'll get an update on where that's at right now. But there's so much going on in the world right now that I wanted to get an opportunity to talk to you about a couple of things. First off, obviously we're in the middle of the Democratic National Convention, and the Republicans have made some news recently, especially with Donald Trump speaking at a Bitcoin conference. So Bitcoin has got itself back in the news once again during this presidential run.
What I would say is we've spent a lot of time down in DC, and over the past 2 years of kind of bringing our products to market, uplisting our private placements to become ETFs in the form of Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum ETFs, we have seen digital assets more broadly go from being kind of a partisan issue to a bipartisan issue, and now I think it's essentially a nonpartisan issue, which is probably the most bullish indicator. And as we've been polling investors and polling Americans, we've seen that more and more Americans are considering digital assets as something they're focused on when making their decisions. So it's not surprising to me that as the presidential election kind of in the race kind of heats up, that we're seeing digital assets become a component of the conversations, but on both sides.
Yeah. Are you looking at potentially adoption being more of the as the younger sector of the world grows into it? Because I just can't even imagine the older section wanting to take an opportunity to go into a Bitcoin, let's say, for instance, and not really having the understanding of what it is or where it's going to go. And where I think as a younger citizen, more than likely you're used to these kind of things already and feel okay to take a little bit of a risk.
Well, there's a couple of ways I could answer that, but what I would tell you is that this is a massive inflection point having spot ETPs in market that are offering digital assets to the broadest range of investors. And historically, wealth management platforms, some of the largest wealth management platforms, in the world, have not been able to offer digital assets. So now you have a $30 trillion asset pool in advised wealth in the US that now has credible access in a reliable wrapper that people understand. And so recently, Morgan Stanley just onboarded some Bitcoin ETFs. We think that other wealth management platforms are going to follow. And all of a sudden, it puts wealth managers and advisors in a position where they really have to have an opinion on digital assets. Now, that's not to say that every client or every investor should have an allocation to digital assets, but it does mean that the advised market and the advisors and the wealth managers need to have an opinion and need to become educated on it. Now, there's 80 trillion in wealth that is going to transfer from generation to generation. So, these advisors need to make sure that their franchises are built for purpose and are built for longevity and are built to, transfer that wealth going forward. So this inflection point, we're about 8 months into, having spot ETPs in the US market. And this is something that is really kind of developing, but we're super excited to see wealth managers onboard these products. And we think the growth opportunity is really massive.
And we're hearing words that we've heard before, but are making a return. I mentioned Bitcoin. Ethereum also is another one that is of interest as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ethereum ETPs in late May, there was a little bit of a shift in the political winds in the form of the SEC kind of being a bit unfavorable towards the spot ETP approvals. But then in late May, I think it was May 23rd, we got the approvals of some 19b4, so regulatory filings that were going to permit ETPs in the form of spot Ethereum to come to market. And that has just been another, shoe to drop in terms of the broader adoption. So you have the two largest digital assets coming to market in the form of, again, a very reliable, very robust, very battle-tested ETP wrapper that is really putting, individual investors, the advised market, and some of the largest institutions in the world in a really credible position to add allocations to the two largest digital assets. We have seen, some of the pensions in the U.S. market start to adopt them. Wisconsin, Michigan, and others are considering it, and we think that this is going to be a real windfall for the broader asset class and some tailwinds.
Yeah, inflation numbers were out. They were holding steady, which is obviously a positive news for people around North America. Does that sort of, to you, signal a bit of help for what we've seen as far as the markets are concerned and the volatility that we've seen over the last couple of years? Do you feel there's some pressure here to maybe sort of lower that volatility down a bit, and will that happen?
Listen, we saw extreme volatility coming out of some of the news coming out of Japan. So we saw a spike to, I think vol spiked to over 50. I think that's something we hadn't seen since maybe the financial crisis. So volatility is kind of in market right now. We were happy to see that despite some volatility in Bitcoin prices, we saw Bitcoin really rebound. And I think that as it pertains to kind of broader inflation numbers, inflationary concerns, we're going to be very closely watching the Fed and see what the Fed does with interest rates, and that's going to be really indicative of where the market goes from here. So we're paying attention. Bitcoin has been incredibly resilient, but as it pertains to inflation, I think it's something really to watch on a go forward.
Absolutely. Let's update the Future Finance ETF. Give everyone just a quick synopsis of what it is so everyone's up to date and what you're seeing there.
What I would say broadly, the Grayscale Future of Finance is a thematic equity-based ETP. And, sometimes I like to make the analogy to gold. There are investors that like to invest in gold. There are investors that like to invest in gold miners. There are investors that like to invest in a gold exchange traded product, or there are investors that like to invest in kind of the gold ecosystem. It's very similar to digital assets. You can own Bitcoin, you can own Ethereum, you can own them in an ETP wrapper, you can own miners, or you can own a thematic equity ETF that is really kind of that bridge between digital assets, and the traditional financial markets. The Grayscale Future of Finance offers that opportunity to take advantage of the broader ecosystem of digital assets and really offer you exposure to, the picks and shovels, so to speak, of the broader digital asset marketplace. And so we're really thrilled to be able to offer our clients the opportunity to invest in the Grayscale Future of Finance to meet that need.
Absolutely. David, thanks so much. Great to get a little insight into what's going on around the world and also the fund as well. Great to see you again as well.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Be good.
Yeah, you as well. David Lavelle, the global head of ETF for Grayscale.